She's also a program. We also have Hannah Katz, who is calling from Connecticut, and she has been with the LAV unit at OVW for 2 years. And I am calling from Massachusetts, and I've been with OVW for 1.5 years. And prior to this, I worked as a civil legal services attorney, representing immigrant survivors. So just to give you a quick outline, we will take a brief pause in between each section for a couple of questions. So if you would like to include questions in the chat, we will monitor them. But we will also have a full Q&A at the very end of the presentation. And so I just want to make sure everyone knows that if you have questions, you can ask them as you go. If you're not sure what your questions are till the end, that's okay too. We want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask questions and have them answered today. And then with that, I'm going to move on to the next slide. This is what we are going to be covering today, just so that you have a brief roadmap and know what to anticipate. We're going to do a high-level, sort of broad overview of the Legal Assistance for Victims program. And then we will move into the nuts and bolts of the Expanding Legal Services Initiative, which is why you're all here. What is it? What's the purpose? Who is eligible? What does it, what are the benefits? What does an award include? Then we will talk about the application process. Again, more of a high-level overview of how to apply for funding from the LAV program, including ELSI. Then we will review some helpful do's and don'ts when applying to ELSI or really any of our LAV programs, either of our LAV programs, I should say. And then we will go right into our Q&A. So it's a lot of content to cover, so we'll get right into it. Just really quickly here, for those of you who are not familiar with the Legal Assistance for Victims program at the Office of Violence Against Women, and before we launch into the ELSI program, it's really important for folks to understand the LAV program as a whole, under which ELSI was created. And the Legal Assistance for Victims grant program started as a set-aside from the Stop Violence Against Women Formula Grants program. And then it was statutorily created in the Violence Against Women Act of 2000. So 23 years ago, right? And of course, we know it was reauthorized again in 2005, 2013, and most recently last year. The program, as you can read there, is designed to strengthen civil and criminal legal assistance programs. And I think the takeaway I want you to keep in mind as you read this paragraph is that all LAV programs are to support survivors of one of the 4 VAWA crimes listed there: domestic violence, intimate partner domestic violence, dating violence, intimate partner or non-intimate partner sexual assault, and stalking. And the purpose is to support survivors by funding, as you could read there, comprehensive, right, holistic, whole direct legal programs related to or arising out of one of those 4 crimes. And then with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague Sandy to talk to you more about the LAV program as a whole.
Hi everyone. So just a brief overview, as you can see here on this slide, about the types of things that the LAV program supports. So we want to support appropriately trained civil legal representation for survivors, and we support comprehensive legal representation services. If you read a recent LAV solicitation, you'll see that projects must include a licensed attorney, with one exception. In the LAV solicitation, organizations that are only providing services within tribal courts may have tribal lay advocates and not have attorneys, but all other programs are required to have a licensed attorney. And then all the legal services must be for legal matters related to or arising from the domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. And our legal representation services can support post-conviction legal matters related to victim safety. And I would also like to note, as of the reauthorization in 2022, it can support post-conviction relief matters for victims who were convicted of crimes that were related to or arising from domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Next slide. So this is the list of the eligible applicants, and all of our eligible applicants listed here are set forth in the statute in VAWA. So nonprofits, publicly funded organizations not acting in a governmental capacity, think of like public universities, territorial organizations, Indian tribal governments, and tribal organizations and coalitions. Next slide. And so the Legal Assistance for Victims program supports a broad range of legal services. Like Simone said earlier, our goal is to ensure that survivors have access to comprehensive services to meet all of the legal needs that arise from the victimization. And so that's going to include, but not be limited to, the items on this list: protection orders, family law, employment, housing, immigration, and Title IX and education issues. Next slide. I'm passing it over to Maria.
Yes, thank you, Sandy. Hello, everyone, and welcome. And I just wanted to take a moment to recognize that we have participants from, looks like all over right now. We have people saying hi from Oklahoma, from Los Angeles, from Puerto Rico. So that's wonderful to have you all here today. Thank you for joining us. The next couple of slides, I will be with you to talk, to start out talking about ELSI, which is the Expanding Legal Services Initiative. And I'm coming to you from Colorado Springs. And so to start out with the introduction about ELSI, the reason that it came about was we recognized, oh, we have someone from American Samoa. And sorry, I was distracted. That's awesome. Hello. So we recognized that some of our community-based organizations, also along with tribal entities, were facing some challenges when competing for standard LAV award. And just to put that in perspective for you, I recently acquired a grantee, fiscal year 23, who had applied for the Legal Assistance for Victims application 5 times, and they're finally getting funded this year. So it's not to discourage anyone. It's just to let you know that we get great and awesome applications. There's great work being done all across this nation of ours. And so it is very competitive, but we realized that, again, our community-based organizations were sometimes at a disadvantage if they didn't already have an in-house legal program. And so we created ELSI for that specific reason. And so Sandy talked about the LAV solicitation, the program. So ELSI is going to cover many of the same things, but the big difference is that if your organization does not currently have a comprehensive legal representation program, this would allow you to apply so that you can establish one from the ground up. Perhaps you have been thinking about it in your organization, that it would be really good for clients, for survivors, to have that legal representation. As many of you know, when you're doing direct service, that's often when a client needs the most help is with an attorney. And when they don't have an attorney, it can keep them trapped in that cycle of violence. And so if you have thought about it would be really great to have that within our agency for our community. This is something that you will want to consider. So again, it's about, for those of you who are community-based organizations or a tribal entity, and we will talk about who can apply soon, in establishing the program from the ground up. And so again, that was the reason for ELSI, is to allow these organizations to have a way to come into applying for funding, but also recognizing that there are challenges there, because it's not easy to stand up a program by any means. And then when you're talking about a comprehensive legal program, that's going to take some work. And so this is where ELSI comes into play. Next slide. So who may apply? And again, it's the same for the LAV solicitation. But the most important difference is that your organization does not offer in-house legal representation. Now, you may already be an applicant receiving LAV funds under a current award. You may even be a lead grantee with an LAV award that is ending on or before September 30th, 2024, but you don't have an in-house legal representation. Perhaps you are an MOU partner or subrecipient also who does not offer in-house legal representation. So if you don't have, again, that's the key. I can't stress that enough, that is the difference between our standard LAV solicitation. For example, we have, for our current LAV recipients, they have their own in-house legal representation and have had one for many years, or they contract out to have an attorney on their team. And so that is not what ELSI is about. It's about allowing an organization to come in and establish one from the ground up. And so those who can apply, as you can see on the screen, are nonprofit organizations, tribal organizations, and tribal governments, along with DBSA organizations. Sometimes we have coalitions who have applied for the LAV funding, but they have their own in-house legal program, right? And so the LAV is for them. This is for a DBSA organization that does not have one. We also have community-based organizations and multi-service organizations. And to give you an example, I recently, a couple weeks ago, I met a service provider, and she's from the Denver area, and they specifically work with in the Muslim immigrant community. She does not have an in-house legal program, and so this would be a perfect fit for her. And so on that note, if we go to the next slide, keeping in mind that example with the direct service provider of the Muslim organization working with Muslim immigrants, her organization would be given a priority consideration if she were to apply for ELSI. She has an organization that is advancing equity, but also for organizations that are advancing equity and tribal sovereignty by improving services to underserved and historically marginalized communities. And so to expand on that a little bit further, to receive this consideration under this priority, the lead applicant must have a demonstrative and distinctive history of using culturally appropriate and linguistically specific strategies to serve communities that have been historically marginalized and face barriers to accessing mainstream systems and service providers. Again, so if you keep that example in mind, that's an example where an organization can be given a priority consideration. Population-specific organizations also will receive priority consideration, and that is one that primarily serves members of a specific underserved population. Again, and I'm repeating this, but has demonstrated experience and expertise providing culturally and linguistically specific targeted services to members of that specific underserved population. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Hannah, and she will take it from here.
We just a quick interjection. I don't see any questions in the chat. But if folks have questions where they want to unmute themselves, we can answer a few questions now. If you do have questions, or you can type them up into the chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on that, but the chat window keeps disappearing on me. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? Okay, it's all yours, Hannah.
Thanks, Simone, and thanks, Maria. So we now wanted to briefly talk about our application and award process. This applies to both ELSI and LAV, as well as in many cases across OVW. So first, we release a solicitation, in our case, 2 solicitations, one for ELSI specifically, and then one for the standard LAV program. We anticipate that we'll release this year's solicitation in November or December, but this date is provisional, and we encourage you to check the OVW website for the latest information. Once the solicitation is released, the application window will be open for the application, not application window, will be open for 6 to 8 weeks. So that is, you'll have 6 to 8 weeks to put together your application and submit it before the application deadline hits. Once that deadline hits, applications, there's a 3-stage review process for the applications that we receive. First, we here at OVW conduct what we call a basic minimum review, which is just that. We review each application to determine whether it meets basic eligibility requirements and to determine if it includes the basic materials necessary to constitute a substantially complete application. All applications that pass through basic minimum review go on to a more comprehensive review by external peer reviewers. That is folks outside of OVW who are experts in the field in all different ways. Folks who have experience and expertise that is relevant to ELSI and to the LAV program. All applications that pass through that stage of peer review return to us for a second round of internal review. This is more comprehensive, more detailed than that initial basic minimum review, and helps us make our final selections, helps us decide which applications we're going to award. We anticipate that for this year, grants will begin on October 1st, 2024, though this, as the solicitation release date as well, this date is subject to change. Next slide, please. So while you're waiting for that solicitation to be released, there are at least 5 things that you can do, probably more, but we have 5 recommended activities that you can launch off on in preparation. So first, we encourage you to read last year's, that is a fiscal year 2023 ELSI solicitation, which is available on the OVW website. Later in the presentation, we'll include specific links that you can follow to access the ELSI solicitation, as well as to take all of the other steps listed on this slide. So links to come. Second, we encourage you to review successful LAV projects, which are available in OVW's annual report, or I should say OVW's report to Congress. Again, we'll link that later in the presentation. Third, we would certainly welcome you to explore the OVW website broadly, and particularly focusing on the LAV page on the OVW website. Fourth, and probably most immediately, if you're interested in applying for ELSI, LAV, or really any OVW grant program this year, is you can sign up to receive email notifications when any new solicitation is posted. So you'll be among the first to know when there are new solicitations up and ready for applications across OVW. And finally, we encourage any folks who are interested to apply to become a peer reviewer, to be one of those external experts who are evaluating applications for OVW. An important note here, if you are applying for, let's say, ELSI this year, you, for obvious reasons, cannot serve as an ELSI peer reviewer and generally can't serve as an LAV peer reviewer either for this year. However, that doesn't mean that you can't serve as a peer reviewer in future years where you have not submitted an application. Or you could also serve as a peer reviewer for another OVW grant program. We're all always looking for new qualified folks to join us on peer review. And more on that on the next slide. So a couple of links if you are interested in either becoming a peer reviewer or just learning a little bit more about the process. We invite you to visit our peer review page on the OVW website. OVW website, you can just type peer review into OVW or Google it. The link is also here. And when you do receive slides after the presentation, it's a clickable link. So we'll take you right there. If you do have any general questions about becoming a peer reviewer, we encourage you to email the peer review mailbox at ovw.peerreview@usdoj.gov. That is also, you'll find on that peer review page on the OVW website instructions about applying if you wish to apply. And ultimately, those applications will also come into that mailbox. So everything is sort of centralized there if you're interested. Next slide, please. And I don't know if we want to pause if there are any questions at this point or soldier on.
I don't see any questions in the chat yet,
Okay.
but we can also just, we can ask folks if they have questions, and you can unmute yourself if you do. Or we can soldier on.
So, soldiering commenced. So we now want to transition into some helpful hints that we have for you. Application do's or don'ts. We developed these with ELSI in mind, but they certainly apply to LAV as well. Oh, I think we're going back slides, perfect. And in many cases across OVW grants. So some do's. First, and like probably foremost, do read the solicitation carefully, noting any requirements and restrictions that are indicated in the solicitation. Relatedly, do use the solicitation criteria headers as you're organizing your application. This allows reviewers to be able to quickly identify where to find different pieces of information in your application, and helps reviewers acknowledge or see that you have met all of the required criteria listed in the solicitation. Third, write your application as if the reader knows nothing about your organization. The application should stand for itself. There's not going to be any external Googling or information finding outside of what's in your application. So make sure that it is self-contained in that way. Do show us how your organization will implement each of the solicitation requirements. So definitely paint a picture. Make sure that we can envision how your project will be carried out if you are funded. Fifth, do identify the legal needs of all survivors in your communities. So be reflective about who is in your service area, who are you serving, and what are their specific legal needs. Make sure that you're comprehensive, complete, and thoughtful in this sense. Next slide. And a few more related to that. Do describe your community's specific needs using recent local data where available. And as an extra note on that, if recent and or local data are not available, it's helpful for you to acknowledge that as well, that you know you're not using recent local data, but you're doing the best you can with with the tools and resources that you have at your disposal. Do ensure that your budget can support the goals and objectives in your narrative. So your application should be internally consistent. We should see in your budget costs that are directly linked to activities that you've described in your narrative. And you should make sure that your budget is sufficient to cover costs associated with those activities. As a general principle, all staff who are writing the narrative, implementing the project, or drafting the budget should collaborate in the application. Everybody should be involved and on the same page. we're getting close to the end here, lots of do's. Do know all deadlines. Be sure to plan to submit your application at least 48 hours before the deadline. This will give you enough time in case any difficulties arise, including technical difficulties, which we know hit at the most inopportune moments. Finally, do use the linked samples, the solicitation companion guide, and the resources for applicants, which are all available on the resources for applicants page within the OVW website. I'll note here that if you go to that resources for applicants page now, you'll find materials that are current for 2023 rather than 2024. But hopefully all of those will be updated soon to be the most applicable to any 2024 applicants. And with that note, I'm going to turn it back over to Simone to review some application don'ts and bring us home.
Thank you, Hannah. Let me advance the slide. And one thing I just want to say is, as Hannah went through those 10 application do's, and I will be going through the 5 application don'ts. Like, you really want to listen in, because I can say the process of creating these slides, we all met, spent quite a bit of time, and kind of came up with the things that we as program staff know that peer reviewers and you know, external review process and internal review process we want to see. And these are the areas where we see points are lost, right? Sometimes points get lost in these areas here that we're providing these so some of it seems obvious, but when you're in the thick of it and you have the application deadline looming and you're trying to handle all the various things that you need to handle for your work, sometimes it's easy to overlook or you know, miss things. So I highly recommend that if you're applying, you know, everyone's going to get a copy of this slide deck. Open it up to these helpful hints, if nothing else at all. open it up to these helpful hints and use it as a checklist as you are going through the process of organizing your application and then before you submit. Okay, so application don'ts. First one is don't include. This is something that we actually see quite a bit. Folks including or referencing attachments that the solicitation does not ask for. We can't even review them. So if you want to spend your time and focus on the solicitation requirements, there are plenty of materials that are probably helpful in in telling the story of your community or of your work. But if it's not requested in the solicitation, don't include it. It's just we can't, reviewers can't even look at it. So it would be a waste of your time and effort to try to compile that. Just don't include them, don't attach them. Number 2, you might, we had a helpful application due where we are asking you to use the headings, just the solicitation headings, but you don't want to copy the language in the solicitation in the area where we ask applicants to demonstrate expertise and capacity. So there's language in there that just, you want to make sure that you are using your own words and your own, telling your own story in your own words, because that's going to come through for all reviewers when you are attempting to demonstrate your own expertise. It's going to be very unique to the work that you do for your community. Number 3, do not go over the budget cap. Hopefully you're working with a financial director or someone in charge of the budget for your grant applications. You want to make sure that they know what the budget cap is. You might know what it is, but they may not be aware of what the budget cap is. Don't go over the budget cap. Write your proposal to the budget and vice versa. This is an area where you can lose points. So you want to make sure you keep to the budget and propose a budget that is within the cap. It also helps show that, if you have a budget that goes over, it's an indication that you are not able to implement your project with the amount of funding that we are able to provide. Number 4, formatting and technical requirements. Don't ignore it. It's in the solicitation. It's laid out. It's one of the easiest areas to follow, but it's also one that can be easily overseen, and then you lose points. You don't want to lose those. So make sure you keep to the formatting and technical requirements. And when you should be having other folks on your team review. If you have a second set of eyes reviewing the application, make sure that they also know what the formatting and technical requirements are in case they're making edits to it that you're not aware. And of course, the last one is don't forget to review your application before submitting. It's obvious. It seems very obvious, but I can tell you, I was a former LAV grantee. And I know what it's like when, again, that deadline is looming and you've made, 20 revisions to your application with the help of, 5 other people. And that last version, you think you know what it is, but you need to review it. You and your team want to review that very last final version from top to bottom once again before you submit. It's highly recommended. So those are our application do's and don'ts. We promised you links. Again, everyone will receive a copy of the slide deck. So in it, an electronic copy, you'll be able to open it up and then actually click on these links here. They're clickable and they will bring you to the pages that we mentioned earlier, that Hannah had mentioned. Applicant resources is a link to multiple resources for applicants, and it's a helpful page. This is for if you are you want to apply and you're ready to apply and you want to gather some additional resources on the technical aspects of applying. And I believe that page includes the solicitation companion area. The OVW email sign up for solicitation announcements, Hannah had mentioned earlier. It's a great one to have, even if you're not sure you want to apply this year and you're just exploring ELSI and LAB funding for your team, maybe for your strategic plan for the next few years. Sign up for the solicitation announcements. You, as Hannah mentioned, you'll be amongst the first to know when OVW has released a solicitation funding opportunity, including the LAB standard solicitation and ELSI. This is also the link to what Hannah had mentioned, examples of successful projects. They're included in our report to Congress that we I believe we report every 2 years to Congress on the work of OVW. And in there, there's a work of LAB grantees. If you want to if you're new to LAB and you want to get a sense of the holistic and comprehensive legal work that grantees provide. And then, of course, the last one is just another link again, plugging, a lot of you folks here today, I think all of you are folks who are in the community, who are in the field doing the work that we would like to fund. This is your work. These are your communities. You know the work. So become a peer reviewer for OVW, and the link to additional information, including the email, is at that link there. Okay. I believe that brings us to our question and answer session. I'm actually going to stop the slide show because I'm looking at 2 different screens as I present screen share, and it's hard to keep track of the chat function. So I'm going to stop this here, and we will open it up to questions. And I think we might have, I don't know if we have. Do we have any questions in the chat? Okay, we do. Okay, so I'm going to moderate the questions. I will be going off of questions from the chat, but if folks have a question that they want to unmute and ask the question, I also welcome folks to do that. And my wonderful colleagues, Maria, Hannah, and Sandy will help answer the questions. And the first one here. And in the meantime, I ask everyone to keep muting themselves for the benefit of our interpreters. Okay, let's see. First question here. We have would an organization with pro bono lawyers qualify for ELSI? Anyone on the LAV panel? I'm happy to answer it too.
I can jump in, Simone.
Okay.
So I'm assuming that this question is saying that like you use volunteer lawyers to provide the legal services instead of in-house attorneys. You would be eligible to apply to ELSI to establish the in-house legal representation services.
Does that answer your question? If it does not answer your question, just let us know. I'll go ahead and unmute. Thank you, Sandy. Next question. What populations are considered underserved under this grant?
I'm happy to jump in. I think the best answer we can give is from Executive Order 13985. I believe you just read out the numbers, but in any case, you can Google it for sure, 13985, which defines equity specifically, but references underserved communities. So in that definition, underserved communities include such as Black, Latino, and Indigenous and Native American persons, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and other persons of color, members of religious minorities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer or LGBTQ+ persons, persons with disabilities, persons who live in rural areas, and others. So the definition is quite broad. The executive order just gives examples. And I think the purpose here is an underserved community is one that has been denied fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals. That's kind of the overarching definition. I don't know if that was helpful, but that is the language of the executive order that's guiding this priority this year.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Okay. Next question is, just going back to the question on pro bono lawyers. I think it did answer the question. They're saying that they have voluntary lawyers, so I think they have pro bono volunteer lawyers, but no in-house attorneys. And so in that case, you would be eligible to apply for ELSI if you are intending to establish and start a program that will include an in-house attorney. Next question is, we provide services to all domestic violence survivors in our county. We are not fully population specific, but we are the only service provider for an underserved population. Would we qualify for ELSI?
So yes, the priority area is a priority area. It does not limit organizations who are eligible to apply to population-specific organizations. It just says who may receive priority consideration during the review process.
Thank you, Sandy. Next question is, does the attorney have to be in-house, or can we collaborate with a nonprofit providing legal services to fund a full-time position dedicated to working with us?
So for ELSI, you would be establishing an in-house legal services program, and it's there's a planning period included, and you would hire a staff attorney in-house before you begin implementation. However, if you want to apply for LAV, you can partner with another organization who would provide the legal representation services.
Thank you, Sandy. Yes, that does sound like if that's your intention to collaborate with a nonprofit providing legal services, that would be for an LAV standard solicitation, which we didn't review in detail, but we did cover it at the beginning of the presentation. And a lot of the links that we did provide today, the resources, link to applicant resources and to past solicitations, those are all also relevant to the LAB solicitation for those of you who have decided maybe the LAB standard solicitation is the way to go for you. Next question. What is the due date to submit the application for this grant?
I'm happy to take that one. So we don't have a due date yet because we don't have the solicitation release yet. So, excuse me, once we release the solicitation, the due date will be listed in the solicitation, and it will be 6 to 8 weeks after we post the solicitation. So we'll know more once we have a solicitation up.
Thank you. And again, if you sign up for the email announcements, the email to get OVW announcements for solicitation release, you will know exactly when it is released. But okay, next question. We are a nonprofit that serves a community that is underserved. We have held VOCA and Stop VAWA grants. We have never provided legal representation. Would it be acceptable for us to partner with a legal aid organization that houses lawyers, but one in which we would fund if we received this grant?
This commenter also said that the previous answer to a similar question answered her question.
I see that. Oh, yes, thank you. I was just going to say, it's a good question. You know,
it is a good question.
I think that, you know, when we hear potential applicants asking the same question over and over again, it's good for us to, it's something to think about, right? So we can, happy to clarify that point. You know, if it's unclear, it's totally fine. Question we have, do you know how many grants will be approved, I assume, under ELSI? I think we have the number of grants from FY23, which is 8, right?
Right. Last year we had 8 ELSI. We made 8 ELSI awards, and we made, was it, Hannah, do you remember, 50 something, maybe between 50 and 55 LAV
Yes,
awards?
it was the low 50s. Yes.
Yeah.
LAV, yes.
So we have, again, the 2 solicitations, the standard LAV solicitation, where we made 50 something awards, and then the ELSI solicitation where we made 8.
It was 55 for the LAV.
Okay, thank you, Maria. And is the LAV grant a 3-year term? And I just want to clarify, I think that they are asking about the LAV standard solicitation.
So the last several years, the project period for LAV has been 36 months. And the project period for ELSI last year, the first year we released the solicitation, was 24 months with a potential of 36 months of non-competitive funding after the end of the initial award period.
Right. Which would bring the ELSI award period, if they receive the continued 36 months, to 5 years. And I will also add, I don't recall if we, and I apologize if we did touch upon this, that those who are do receive the initial 24 months of funding also would be receiving comprehensive technical assistance and training to help them establish their in-house legal program. Okay, I think that, oh, there's more here. Could an agency apply as the lead on an FY24 ELSI application and still be an MOU partner on an application for a FY24 LAV standard solicitation?
Yes, It is acceptable to be a lead applicant in one program or in ELSI because there aren't project partners required in ELSI, and a project partner on an on an LAV application. You could apply as a lead applicant under both programs, but you can only be funded under one of them.
Thank you, Sandy. Does ELSI have particular supervision requirements for attorneys, similar to how LAV requires supervision for young attorneys? Would a recipient of ELSI funds be able to contract or set up an MOU with a firm or organization specifically for supervision of the in-house legal counsel, or does supervision also need to be in-house?
The solicitation as written does not require that the supervision be in-house. For ELSI, the first 12 to 18 months of the project is actually going to be establishing the policies and procedures and doing the search for an attorney. And during that time, you would make the determination on how supervision will be handled and set up the relationship that's needed to provide the required supervision when you begin implementing the legal services.
Does that answer your question, Caitlin? Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Sandy. Can a 2023 LEV grant be extended if monies were not fully expended, or do you recommend to apply for the new solicitation? And this is applying to LEV grant.
So there is the possibility of applying for what we call a no-cost extension or a project period extension. If within the 36 months you have not been able to achieve all of the goals and objectives of your LAV funded project, you would presumably also need some funds left over to carry you through the extension. However, the purpose of the extension is not simply to spend down money. That's not the motivating force here. It's to allow you more time to achieve project goals. And that decision, that application would come towards the very end of your 36-month period.
Thank you. Okay. Any additional questions from anyone in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute? You are second. It's one typing. Okay.
For that last question about extending the grant, there was a second part. I don't know if it was answered for her. If they don't get extended, would you recommend to apply for the new solicitation? And I just wanted to say that you can apply for, even if you get an extension, you can apply for the new solicitation. There would just be some conditions placed on the new funding if you were to be awarded the new funding. I just wanted to be sure that the whole question was answered for you.
So most LAV solicitations also, to kind of build on Maria's point here, say that if you have 50% or more of your funds remaining as of a specific date, that you may not be considered for funding under that like new opportunity. And that's because it would be preferable to request the extension instead of applying for under the new solicitation.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Sandy. And I think those are all the questions we have today. Everyone will get a copy. Everyone who has registered and is on the call will get a copy of this slide deck with the direct links to the pages that we mentioned, including, I believe, if it's not there right now, I will add it, our OVW LAV inbox, so that if you have additional questions after bringing it back to your team today or thinking about it further, please do reach out and ask us your question. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us.